Hate to interrupt the party. I want to welcome you all here today on behalf of the Chamber and AT&T, who sponsors our legislative updates. I don't think Lane Radiger is here today. I always mispronounce his name, so thank goodness he actually isn't here. The way that our morning will work, many of you have been here before. You're going to write down a question for me, and I'm going to bring them up. I'm going to try to sort them by topic. We try to get through all of them. And in the past, amazingly, we have gotten through virtually every question. If they're very similar, we lump them together. So if I don't word a question exactly as you wrote it down, it's because there was a very similar question, and so we put those together. I want to welcome our legislators today. Good morning. Senator Randall Hardy, 24th District. Hey. Representative Stephen Johnson, 108th District. Representative Diana Dierks, 71st District. And Representative J.R. Claeys, 69th District. I'm going to ask each of you to make a brief opening statement, and that'll give me time to kind of collect some questions before we get started. So, who would like to go first? How do you want to do this? No. Ladies first. Diana never gets to go first, so ladies first.
Thank you so much for coming today. I understand that we're supposed to really speak up loud because the mic might not be working. Can you hear me?
Flip the switch. Barely. Right here. There you go. There.
How's that?
Better.
Hey, awesome. Yeah, well, I'll go ahead and sit down now. I just, it's great to see all the folks out in the audience again, and I was listening intently, to what the congressman had to say. I'm really anxious to get back to work on May 1st to see what other trouble we can get ourselves into. But it's been a real pleasure serving all of you guys this session. There's been some short-term and long-term anxieties because, there's so many things that we have to work on, and being able to really dig our teeth into them and get to work. And sometimes it's been a little frustrating because, we're waiting for bills to come above the line and they're not getting there. And, we just got to gavel in, gavel out. And finally, towards the end, we were actually really working on some policy pieces. And I'm really anxious to get back and see what else we can do, especially, like the school bill. But I just wanted to say howdy, and I'm going to pass the mic on so my colleagues here can kind of get going, because I want to be able to have enough time to answer all of your questions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Diana.
You're welcome.
First, thank you to the Chamber, AT&T, and of course our moderator today. Appreciate it. I don't know, there are a few things that I guess I'd like to talk about before we get into questions that might not come up during the question period. There are a few items that I've been working on this session. I do serve on the Appropriations Committee. I serve as chair of the State Building Construction Committee. That's a joint committee between the Senate and the House. I also chair the General Government Budget Committee and serve on the Transportation Committee. And some of the things in appropriations, I think primarily, I'll talk a little bit about that. We've been working on the Kansas State Polytechnic Professional Pilot Program and adding some positions there to deal with increases in enrollment, anticipated increases and real increases that are happening to make that program really stand out amongst the programs that are out there. A lot of programs that exist for professional pilot training, and just a statistic that might help understand the need for this. If every single pilot program out there was running at 100% capacity, we would only address about 25 to 30% of the need in our pilots across the globe. So we're really in a position to attract and train pilots here in Salina, and those are good paying jobs that we certainly want to help fill. So we added about $520,000 in the budget for that. That goes towards, I think, 9 FTE positions out there at K-State Poly, and then also assists with the UAS IPP program. That's the program that we won through the Transportation Department with KDOT, and then probably 50 stakeholders. that are involved in that, to make Kansas one of the few places where companies can come and fly their aircraft, test them, build them, engineer them, that sort of thing. Next up on the list, House Bill 2118. That's a bill that's currently passed the House. It had over 100 votes on that one. I carried that bill. It is a tax credit program, and that tax credit is a tax credit to a company that hires a student perhaps who graduates from Kansas State Polytechnic. I'm using hypothetical because it applies across the state. But let's say that you have an engineering student who graduates K-State Polytechnic. They take a job. A company can receive a 50% tax credit for paying 100% of that student's student loans. So it's more of a student loan program than anything else, but it incentivizes the company to pay that student loan. And then also there is a tax credit for the actual employee as well, up to $5,000. That is to encourage students to attend colleges like Kansas State Polytechnic and to go into career fields where we need more engineers in the aviation industry, which should turn into jobs here in Salina. Last, I just want to touch on one thing that I think is pretty important and might affect our community in the near future, and that is with our corrections department. We have a serious issue with capacity. And Lansing, when it was built, I think a lot of people were under the misconception that it was going to add capacity and deal with our capacity problems. The rebuild of Lansing added 27 beds to the entire system. So when we shoved all of those people into El Dorado and Hutchinson and such, that was a temporary solution that created a lot of problems. And those problems are solved by putting those people right back into Lansing. However, once we do that, we're back at 100% capacity, 101%, perhaps 103 by the time that happens. So we need to build a prison. And I would also note that back when Lansing was being discussed as a rebuild, the recommendation from the department was to actually build 2 new cell blocks at El Dorado, which would have increased capacity. That's now off the table because El Dorado can't staff the cell blocks it has. And in fact, might be in a position where it has to close one because it doesn't have staff. Seeing videos of our corrections officers in positions where they are being stabbed repeatedly, that's tough. That's tough to watch. And over a 72-hour period, there were 3 incidents where a select few of us were invited to come see what happens when you don't staff appropriately. That's probably the slowest 30 seconds of your life watching someone risk their life to keep us safe. The answer to that is probably, and I'll just throw it out there, I don't know that this is what will happen, but juvenile corrections has really changed. And if you look at our footprint with our corrections facilities right now, adult correction facilities are spread across the state. If you have a relative who's in prison, you're capable of visiting them. They can typically be housed somewhere near where their family is. With juvenile corrections, everybody goes to Topeka, kids. The model for juvenile corrections is actually to keep them closer to their families. It definitely helps with recidivism, and it's something that we want to accomplish. So the question is, if you want to add capacity to the adult side, male side, because that's where that tends to be the biggest problem. I think we're only at about 92% with the female side. But if you wanted to do that, you could take the juvenile correctional facility in Topeka and turn it into an adult facility. And then instead of building a big adult facility, which is super expensive, build 3 to 4 juvenile facilities and put them in different locations throughout the state, perhaps even somewhere near or in Salina. That will be coming at us fast, especially because it is such a dire situation, and I'm sure we'll talk later about constitutional requirements, but there's certainly a constitutional requirement when it comes to jail overpopulation and overcrowding, that we can't continue on the path that we're on, especially with Lansing offline, probably for another year or so. Anyway, I'll just stop there. If there are any questions regarding any of those 3 items, I'd be happy to go into more detail. But I think that those are 3 things that you might not be aware of that would be helpful to know about.
Good morning, Stephen Johnson, and good to be with you. Thank you for sharing part of a beautiful morning with us and the chance to hear from you on thoughts that you have for the state and the direction that we go together. The best news that comes to my mind is that tomorrow is Easter, and we'll talk through the other issues that we have and what's important to you. We adjourned 2 weeks ago from the general session. We will resume on May 1st. The Appropriations Committee, I think, goes back on April 30th to work on the budget. That's the big chunk of effort that we have remaining for the session. There's other things that we'll want to focus on as well. Each committee, each chamber has different priorities. Looking at Medicaid expansion is something I know the Senate will be wrangling with. On the House side, the budget really is at the top of the list. The tax policy has continued in discussion. There's several policy pieces on the table, and working through those in the conference committee, I was probably the largest stick in the mud, as all of them had some fiscal note attached to them in a tax credit or a tax cut that would be given in some area. And we just have to have a good handle on how all of those fit together before we move any of them forward. Our budget right now is about $300 million negative per year. We're eating into the ending balance that we have. The estimates that we had gotten for several years were understated on the impact of a portion of the tax policy. We now have a pretty good handle on that. The consensus revenue group met on Thursday. I haven't gone through that quite as closely as I will have by Monday, and I'll get into that for a moment. But our estimations are now within tens of millions, which is normal variance. You can't be right on any estimate going forward, but we had been off by hundreds of millions for a few years, and working through that was a key change for us. I think we were up 30 million in the revenue estimate, which will help some, but we don't have the variance to address the issues that Representative Claeys mentioned across the budget areas that are faced. So it will be setting what those priorities are and how we bring that into balance. And right now it would appear that at some point there is a tax increase. The ending balance will get us through the next 2 years with some confidence. The third year is in question on that. The fourth year is underwater by a significant amount. It'll be way different than what it is right now. It's projected to be 245 million, but it'll be different even by the time we pass the budget in a couple of weeks, and certainly different as we get closer to that. Since the adjournment, the main thing I have been working on is back to the industrial hemp project, which I had started working on in 2014. We're finally at the point of some implementation of that. That brings a lot of great opportunities. It will bring some risks and issues as well. Nothing in growth will probably be without pain, but we have several applications. We're fortunate that a lot of folks are interested in helping to promote and research that industry. The previous week we went through about 70 applications, and that's the process of reviewing them for those of us on the board and then approving them in a formal meeting that we have had. Our last one was on Thursday of this last week, which was the same day as the consensus revenue estimate, which is why I didn't get that detail quite as clearly as I normally might have paid attention to that group's report. But good news there, we'll start seeing some seeds going in the ground. A lot of activity just west of us in Russell, and will be good to see what we can do with that. It does bring some risks. There are some things with law enforcement that I would have never anticipated. I learned a lot from Kentucky, who has done this, and we will continue to learn a lot from them and from the efforts that we have. But if we're lucky enough to be close to one of those fields that's growing, just being vigilant is a useful activity for all of us around to make sure that while there's nothing you can get from industrial hemp, the negative creativity around folks that wish to exploit sectors astounds me. And so one of the examples, I think I mentioned it before, a drug dealer in Kentucky would harvest buds from an industrial hemp field, coat it with bug spray, and sell it to kids because you'd get a buzz off the bug spray. I don't know what else you get from that, but I know it's not good. So it's a lose-lose-lose all the way around. And what I know is the Kentucky Bureau of Investigation didn't tell me all the crazy things that went on, but it's that type of creativity that works against a product that by itself is no problem. But there are elements who can figure out how to make it a problem. And so for those of us as being good neighbors, it's just what is the good activity and what do I have to question as it goes along. And we'll get it figured out. But there are a few things that we will have to watch as we go forward, and we'll learn more about those as well. But good news, we will see some seeds going in the ground. We've got a lot of people actually in the industry side that are willing to promote that. That's a big risk. But if we can figure it out, it will also be a potential big reward to actually redefine what those markets could be for products. So one of the things that's going on the positive side, I'll look forward to your questions and getting back to work on the 1st of May.
Thank you, Representative Johnson, and thank you everyone for coming. I'd like to also express my thanks to AT&T for sponsoring this event and for the Chamber to host the event. And I'd like to send a special thank you to my brother Steve and his wife Barb, who drove all the way up from Salina, Texas to be here this morning. That's Salina spelled C-E-L-I-N-A. And just surprised me this morning. So I'm really gonna, if I appear nervous, you'll know why. Yeah, I would like to piggyback. Representative Claeys brought up something about criminal justice system. And I'm in a mindset. I like to preempt stuff as much as we can instead of react. And one thing I'll keep preaching about as long as I'm in Topeka is that I would like to reduce the strain on our judicial system and our criminal justice system by doing something unique, and that would be to take a small sliver from our criminal justice budget and dedicating it to pre-K. I think pre-K education is the future of kids. Kids that enter kindergarten with a 4,000 word vocabulary are much more likely to succeed than kids that enter kindergarten with a 400 word vocabulary. And I think that that's something that should be considered, and I'll just keep passing it along to people, and hopefully somebody will pick up on it that actually controls the money in Topeka. But I sit on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, and I see too many times the effects of not having an adequate education on the people of Kansas. And education is the key to keeping people out of the prison system, and I think that we should do all we can to help in that regard. My Senate district, as you know, includes all of Saline County, and it includes the northern half of Dickinson County, which includes all of the cities along I-70 that you see the exits for as you travel east. And I just wanted to let you know that I did a little analysis at the end of the year and found out that I'd spent 28 trips in Dickinson County in 2018 alone. This week I was in Abilene 3 times. So I am not just a senator for Saline County, although this is 80% of my time probably. But I enjoy immensely being engaged in Dickinson County as well. And we have a 3-week period that we're off, but it really is not the case if you choose to make it that way. This week I was at Grace Stewart School. We have Salina has a master teacher. I don't know if you know that or not. Her name's Carolyn Phelan, And she invited me to her classroom, her first graders, and I talked to them a little bit about state government and read them a book. And next week I'm going to be doing the same thing. There's a school south of Abilene called Rural Center, and I'll be there reading to the kids as well, and talking to the fourth graders about state government. I think it's important to be engaged in the community, in the county, and the whole district, and because I want people to know that I'm accessible. My business card has my cell phone on it. When we left for the 3-week break, my office assistant forwarded my office phone to my cell phone. So anytime it rings, I'm there. And so I enjoy this job. I think it's a blast. It's something that gives me an opportunity to represent the views of the people that are sitting right here. And that's all I care about. When somebody walks through my office door in Topeka, or anytime I come up to somebody on the street in Salina, my first thought is voter. Everybody's my boss, and so I don't have preconceived notions about people. I don't prejudge people. It doesn't. I used to be really good at judging. And I've learned since taking on this job that that's not the point. The point is to represent the people in the district and do the best job you can at taking care of issues, making life better for the people in the city, in the county, and the district. So that is, I'm looking forward. I've been doing stuff every day. But that's okay, and it's all self-imposed, but I continue to do that because I enjoy it. And we'll just talk about various bills that you may be concerned about during the next portion of this, but I appreciate your being here. I feel honored to be here. Thank you.
All right, let's get to some questions. Interestingly enough, most of the questions are social issues. So many of them are the same, so if I don't ask your question exactly as you wrote it, it's because it's very similar again to another one. We're going to go ahead and have the discussion about where we are with Medicaid expansion, please.
I think that was directed to me. Because we're the body that's struggling with the Medicaid expansion bill. And 2 years ago, when the subject was first brought up, I didn't even have to think very hard to know that Medicaid expansion is an important issue for Saline County, Dickinson County both, and for the state of Kansas. We need to provide an option for people who are currently using the emergency room as their primary care physician, which is the most expensive way to receive medical treatment in the state. I would like to, I do know that the Medicaid expansion bill that was passed by the House will be on our calendar the first day we get back on May 1. I do not know that it will fare very well, unfortunately. When the bill has been stuck in committee, and it's stuck in committee on purpose, it requires extraordinary action by the body to remove it from committee. It'll take 24 votes just to get it on what we call general orders, where it has the potential to be debated on the floor. It would take 27 votes in the Senate so that it could be debated without leadership's support. And so what you can do is contact Senate leadership, specifically Senator Denning and Senator Wagle, and encourage them to allow debate on the Medicaid expansion bill starting May 1, when it is discussed on our calendar. So that would be helpful. I would like to see it. I think it makes a lot of sense for our people here. I do know that the hospital administrator over in Abilene mentioned that they wrote up $700,000 in bills that they were not able to collect on last year. And so it would be a big help to Abilene as well. So that's what I know about the bill so far.
And were there a lot of questions related to Medicaid expansion?
Well, I think there were
Okay.
at least three. Where's it at?
Right.
Where's it going? Have we voted? Like,
Right.
I think just an update of where we are with Medicaid. I don't think there's any doubt that all of you have expressed support of Medicaid expansion, correct?
So,
No? They are no? Okay. All right. So
however, most have, and it is a
Right.
useful discussion
Sure.
to have in that, so I did vote for it in the House in terms of the expansion piece, and for the area I represent, I absolutely see what that impact is. The current 9-to-1 match is a big deal, but federal dollars aren't completely free, but it is a big infusion that's there, and getting a handle on that fiscal note is a key. So the senator laid out very well where it is and where it goes from here. The discussion that I think we need to continue to have either way on this is how we go forward and how we continue to address health care, because this change, albeit a major one, would not suddenly fix health care, and we would still have a lot of things to address. And a concern that I have going forward, the state is probably in for some 50 million in our share of the cost, and it probably drives something north of 500 million in investment in the state. Short term, that's a pretty big win. That 500 million will be jiggling through the economy different places and generating some real earnings different places, maybe not at the first point, but wherever that continues through, and that will be helpful. The challenge will be, if it were my business or anything, the needs tend to float to that level, and that becomes the level to which we operate, and there is some risk to whether or not those funds will always be available federally, and there currently isn't the support to backfill that at the state level. So if the first discussion is how and do we pass it, the ongoing discussion is how we continue to work to deliver health care in a manner that meets needs, recognizing that first there is some risk to that funding, and then there is some risk if that does become the new normal, because we're not paying for it at the federal level either. How do we get to operate and offer health care in a manner that's sustainable over decades and possibly centuries, but at least decades as we look at that cost, because that is a big cost that we hand on to the next generation. And we just want to be aware of how we're handling that, however we choose to go forward. So again, I did vote for it, but it is a very useful discussion, because this is another big issue for us to work together to solve, and how we want to have and deliver health care. Thank you.
I think the majority of the audience knows how I feel about Medicaid expansion. I've been an advocate of it since day one. There had been some controversy on how we were able to get that bill even visited in the House by gut and go. We don't like to gut and go one piece of legislation to in place something else, but this was giving us an opportunity to be able to at least bring it above the line and be able to talk about it. And so therefore, and then we really had to work hard in order to get some of our colleagues who just didn't understand why we should have to have Medicaid expansion to vote for it. So I'm hopeful that the Senate will see the light of day, that this is something that has to be taken care of. It's been brought up the last 6 years. We have a safety net clinic right here in Salina that really needs that. You know, they're huge advocates from all the physicians that I visited with. You know, I visited some of the rural hospitals. You know, they are on the verge of closing. You know, we used to dairy farm down by Wellington, and the hospital in Wellington is just on the verge of all the expenses that they've had to absorb. We have to remember that not everybody lives in Kansas City and the metropolitan areas. You have a lot of rural communities out there that do not have the subsidies that maybe some of the major cities have. And two things that'll kill a community quicker than anything else are the schools and the hospitals. And we have to look at this and say, this is what we need to do. We have an obligation to at least give it an opportunity to see how it will affect these communities and the health care of the people who live within our state. So that's why I'm such an advocate for it. I did vote for this bill. I championed it with part of some of my colleagues to say, hey, we really need to get this passed. I know that there's a movement in the Senate. I'm not sure where that is with one of the senators, but we're hoping that maybe it's just time. We had it at one time and we lost it by 3 votes on an override. So let's just, visit with people, let some of the other legislation members know, why this is so important. And I would encourage those individuals who live in those communities, especially, that are just really stressful as far as how they're going to keep their doors open. Tell them to get a hold of the people that represent them. That is the real key. It's going to take a real push, and we're hoping that they're going to be able to let us at least vote on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. I'll just pick on one thing since I'm the outlier here. There are many reasons, but let's talk about TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. It requires, let's just call it welfare to work, but it has work requirements in it. It requires 20 hours a week for able-bodied adults so that they are going through job training, which is also offered by the state, and they are finding a way back to work. That doesn't exist in this. Instead, they went with a $25 fee. And I would see that as a larger barrier to access for services. And an example of that would be our mental health services today. We require $10. $10 is often the difference between someone getting the help they need and not getting the help they need. That's the wrong way of looking at this. We shouldn't be asking people who are absolutely in need to go hunt down $10 when oftentimes they don't have it. Oftentimes they're at the Ashby House or in drug rehabilitation or something like that, and they need those services. And it's often someone else who's fronting that $10 to get them into those services. I think that that's the wrong way to look at it, and it should have been looked at the other way. The TANF system works. It does offer that job training for free. It gets people back to work. It does work. In fact, when we did that bill, we had 6 or 7 people from Salina who'd been through the program come and testify in favor of it because it worked. It gave them a second chance at being productive adults who work and pay their own bills. So I have that problem with it amongst many others, but I'd just point that one out as one of the major issues that I have with Medicaid expansion and the way that we've gone about it in the House.
Well, I lied and said we might get through all the questions, but I don't think we're going to. Good job. Nice work. Okay, let's talk about DCF. Clearly, it's broken. And what is your plan to fix it and reform it beyond just increasing the funding? And also your thoughts and plans on correcting DCF.
So a great point. One of the areas that has been very broken that is there. So to that end, the House set up a new committee on children and families, and that team has been working to find what are the key steps that we need to take. I know that there was one piece of legislation that came early on, and we actually had a good question about it last time, about some federal funds that would be available if we worked and were set up to help us, as was mentioned on other issues, preempt so that we could actually spend dollars to make sure that children can stay in homes where they could work, or make sure that they didn't wind up in areas of the foster care system rather than only start funding it afterwards. And that legislation did come through and has been passed. It's not me. It was, I got to vote on it on the floor, but that committee is the one that was working on that and other issues to try and figure out how we get there. I know it has been a focus of the governor's administration also. I think the appointees that we have there are many of the right people to help work with that. And those are the key things that were done on the House side to recognize and work to address that. Given that funding is a challenge on all fronts in terms of being able to say, yes, we can fix it with money, but how do we make sure that we at least maximize the policies, look at some of the processes that are broken, and at least try to meet needs of the children that are affected as quickly as possible. Do you serve on that committee, Representative? Children and seniors. So we may get a little more depth from Representative Dierks, but those were the things that were set up early on, recognizing the huge issues that we had even in particular in the last year.
I don't really have too much more to add to that. I know that we just simply ran out of time, and it's going to be something that's going to have to be taken up again here this next year. It's very important. You know, our children need to be protected. They need to be taken out of environments that they just necessarily do not have to be in, those type of situations. Of course, you have to look at the monetary aspect of it. There are so many components that we're trying to come together and put a puzzle together to say, this is broken, where's the super glue? Because this is exactly what we need, and it's going to be addressed. We just simply did not have the opportunity to come up with all of the solutions, but it is on the top of the agenda as far as when I go back here this next session in children's and seniors. There's so many other things that our state is faced with, you know, for the families and the people who reside in these communities. It's not a perfect world. I always reference it. It's not Ozzie and Harriet anymore. You know, you have the kids going to school and they're being bullied. You know, we're addressing the bullying situation in our educational system. There are people that are living in homes that you wouldn't want anybody to have to live in. They get lost through the cracks. And we need to seal those cracks up. But where is the super glue to seal those cracks up? You have to go back to the basics, see where it started, the downturn, what it was that we missed, what it was that we need to look for, what kind of a solution that will actually work. And these are the things that the committee is working on. And we've had several people come and testify, give their stories, and it's appalling to hear what some of the things that are going on in our homes, pardon me, that are going on in our homes with our children behind closed doors. You know, I grew up in Los Angeles, and that wasn't always the perfect place either. And sometimes living in conditions at that particular time when jobs were very scarce and you didn't have enough to eat, been there, done that. Living in a neighborhood that I shouldn't have been in. And I have a long story that it still haunts me about how close I came to becoming one of those individuals that would need some psychiatric experiences just in order to forget the trauma that I had to go through. So these are things that are close to my heart. I think we really need to get going on it, really sit down and come up with some solutions that work. I don't know where my voice is going today, but just concentrate. But it's not going to be, we could come up with maybe something, but it's going to be a platform. And what terrifies me is that we reach this platform and say, okay, we have the situation handled. And we're not really looking into maybe some other aspects that we need to be looking at, because you say, well, you just can't put a thin layer of a lid on top of something and hope it's going to work. You need to have some concrete. You need to have something that's stable, something that works, something that you have law enforcement involved in, something educational for our children, educational for the parents, educational for those people who think there's no end in sight. There is, but we have to work collectively together as a body, and this is why it's so important that we're willing to reach across the aisle and ask our other colleagues to help. Because there are resources. Every community in the state of Kansas has its own issues. The metropolitan area, the rural communities. Just because you live in a rural area doesn't mean you don't have some issues. It's everywhere. And we have to address every aspect. And this is something that we're hoping in our committees this next year that we're going to be able to handle something like that. We just simply run out of time. There's so many things that we have to address. At the end, I would like to, when we're finished with the questions, in my opening remarks, I forgot that was the time I was supposed to talk about what we did. But there is a bill that passed out of the House and the Senate that I'm very happy with. And I'm going to get that and explain what that particular bill was. I think it's a start. But I wish this room was full of people, packed solid. This is our community. These are the people that we represent. You have 4 legislators here, Senate and legislation. They are the individuals who are out in our community that really need to know exactly what we do and the limitations that we have. And we're willing to work. So I think that's a start. I really do. And I think these town homes, I would like to, again, appreciate all the people who are responsible for this, because this gets our message out. And working on the DCF, people out there can come forward and feel comfortable to visit with us.
Thank you, Diana. We did add several things in the budget this year, so you'll see some additions that will be helpful towards getting more social workers into the system to provide better service there. We also had a focus on mental health, as I mentioned previously. The lottery vending machines that are going to start popping up in stores soon, those actually have a funding component for our mental health system. So instead of going up to the counter, consider using a lottery vending machine if that's important to you. And I think there are going to be 520 of them over the next 12 or 13 months that are put across the state. But back to the question, in the Department of Children and Families, and then both in our mental health system, there were additions of tens of millions of dollars put into those and put into very specific programs to address the issues that are there. So I think you'll start seeing the results of that over the course of the next 12 months after July, when that budget bill is enacted.
So I took the opportunity to phone a friend and texted the chair of the committee and said, to get just a quick summary to add on it, and the points have been made, and she said, and it's Susan Kincannon from Beloit, she said the Families First was a huge improvement that allowed us to, again, as we'd mentioned, spend the dollars before a child was removed to the home if there was an issue, to see if there was a way to address the need right there, has been found to be meaningfully more effective both for the child, for cost, etc. The next was a focus on the huge case overload. And how do we address that? A couple of things there. The first, as Representative Claeys mentioned, which dealt with budget, we were able to add over 20 social workers to help directly with caseload. The more important piece comes in working with the Child Welfare Task Force that had been formed last year and the recommendations that came out. And a number of those things, she said, have actually been able to be addressed within the DCF entity and will not require legislation. But to work on the oversight, addressing the runaways, issues that had happened for privatized companies, and she also mentioned that Medicaid expansion would help some of the family needs that were there, but that isn't something that has been accomplished as of now. But the key being the Families First, the additional 20 social workers and other things that were added in the budget to be able to help with oversight and deal with the Child Welfare Task Force recommendations that the funding will allow them to handle in-house in DCF.
Anybody? Okay. Since the schools have received the extra 90 million plus per year, what accountability has been built in?
Well, this gets to a big discussion, which is very important for us to have, and school funding is clearly central. Addressing that late in the session, we needed a path to move forward. Thankfully, we do have that. So the first question is which 90 million are we talking about? So there's some monies that had been passed before. Currently, we are adding 104 million a year this year, 2020, and the next year, so there are 4 of those payments that come in. There was an additional 90 million that was approved late in the session with an effort to address the lawsuit, and there were some accountability measures that were in there, but not a great deal. And that gets to, there's, chicken and egg is the wrong analogy, but there's a conflict between saying, well, we want to know where the money goes, but does the state best know where the money needs to go? Well, our local folks probably best know where the money needs to go, but it's hard then for that spending and funding decision to be disparate. And that's what creates the challenge, is saying, well, we're not exactly sure where it goes, but we know we need it. We made a great comment earlier in areas, special education, we all know need a lot more funds to be able to do it the way we are doing it. So there are not a lot of accountability measures that are built into that particular one. There may be some that predate, that deal with previous things that have been passed, but mostly this forum, and to Representative Dierks' comment, is one we need to have broadly across our communities about where we fund, how we fund, and that discussion really needs to continue. I would offer that I don't know that it needs to continue in the courtroom right now, but I think it needs to continue with all of us. It's just us. Where do we raise the money, and where do we allocate it between all of the various needs that we have? So I don't know that there are a bunch of accountability measures that are there. I think it can be important for us to know how those dollars are being spent together as we make the priority decisions between all of the things that we've raised, between healthcare, DCF, corrections, other areas where we have concerns. So, I might clarify which 90 million, and then try and get closer to accountability measures in each of the measures of funding that have been passed.
Yeah, I might add just a little bit. It was the Senate side that proposed the $90 million roughly, and it was the House side that included some policy measures in there. But my way of thinking is that I think it is important that the legislature adequately fund education, and that means to provide our children not just with an adequate education, but with a great education. That's something that has been a hallmark priority for Kansas since in the 40 years I've been here. And I think that's important. I think that on the accountability side of things, I look at the Kansas Board of Education as being the place where that probably should reside, and then as an extension onto the local boards of education to determine that those dollars are being spent as wisely as possible so that kids have a true opportunity to succeed and excel in whatever field they want to pursue. So I think it is important that the legislature provide the adequate funds, and then I would expect the Kansas Board of Education, local boards of education, to implement programs that, with those funds, that would provide the education for kids that we're wanting.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm just looking at the supplemental note because I needed to jog my memory here, but there are some accountability measures, but largely it's reporting I think some of the things that were in the original SB 16 were not included in the funding mechanism. There are some graduation requirements. There was a mild bullying provision. Where is that other one? Some of the audits. They changed some of the audit schedules too, so that we had better access to some of that information when it comes to at-risk education, unencumbered cash balances, bilingual education, virtual school programs, and then there's a cost function performance audit too that's included in there. So I think that's really rounds out what the accountability measures are in the bill.
That pretty well takes care of what I was going to say. In visiting, I keep pretty close contact with Superintendent Hardy to see how things are going in our area. And he says a lot of times people forget the ancillary services in schools, not just all the teachers and administration, it's also the counselors and those individuals who work at the school that are all incorporated. And the funds, are necessary. We're talking about DCF and kids in homes. A lot of times the schools are the safe haven. And that's where when you have the counselors are able to visit with them to see how things are going. That's a good clue for us that we're going to need to take accountability in making sure that our kids are getting the proper education, that they're having an environment in which that they can pursue that education. And it takes money and it takes funds. And it's an all-incorporating aspect of school administration. I really truly feel that, as we have worked so diligently in trying to make sure that we have adequate funding for school, that the Board of Education is what was mentioned before, and those superintendents and people with boots on the ground, so to speak, are going to be sure that that money is going to be going to make those corrections that we need to make in school, make sure that our kids are adequately educated and that they have the facilities and the amount of money that it takes to do that. And I think that's really what the most important thing is.
Thank you. Well, I realize that the Second Amendment is sacred in Kansas and that sanctity is fully endorsed by the Kansas Legislature. My question is, when is the legislature going to show some consideration for the majority of Kansans that do not own guns but pay the costs imposed by gun producers, sellers, and owners, and the negative externalities, costs in the form of lost lives, medical costs, lost productivity, incalculable mental trauma, etc.?
You're welcome.
Wow.
I can bring it over and we can pass it up and down.
I think that to a large degree, I support Second Amendment like everybody else. But that does not mean preclude that we should not have some sort of discussion about measures that might make the citizens of the state of Kansas feel safer, be safer, and I think that we just need to be reasonable, use a little common sense, and decide what's the best route going forward. And I can throw out stuff, but that's not my committee. That's our Fed and State Committee, and that's the thing where in the Senate anyway, a lot of times the committees are, for lack of a better word, packed, so that they work with a certain attitude in mind, and in our Fed and State Committee, that kind of discussion probably won't happen, frankly, and that's where, unless there's a wide consensus among the rest of the body that something needs to be done or said, and so that it's a little bit frustrating to me, and that's why. It matters who your leaders are in government, because they're the ones that decide who's going to be on what committee. And I can say I'm on 4 committees, and I thank President Wagle every day for the 4 committees that I'm on because I love them. And I think she did a thoughtful job in determining which committees would fit my personality and my strengths. And so that, this isn't all political either. But that one committee gets a lot of attention on the Senate side, and it's built so that only certain kinds of topics will be discussed.
And none of us are on the House side or on the Fed and State Committee either. I don't know the makeup of our committee well enough to say if it's stacked any direction. The chair, John Barker, has been pretty open to ideas from across the board, although doesn't try to move a lot of them forward. And if you saw the breadth and number of issues that are there, it's not possible to do all of that. However, I'm guessing that the folks that may author the question, if you have some legislation that you were hoping or waiting to get heard, is you probably have a draft that's more clear than anything that I would know of, I'd be glad to follow up on that with them and see where that is, and see if there are feedback or suggestions that we could say if we went a different direction, if it had a better chance of advancing, if it is there and is not. But I don't have a specific plan to do something different in that committee. And I envy my Senate colleague in that I don't thank leadership for my committee assignments every day, although I'm very happy to get to work with them. So anyway, anything further?
I think the topic's pretty well been covered. Is that there are some committees that have, let's just say, placed membership, because they need the numbers. And I would make a suggestion that if you really have a true eagerness to really see something on the Second Amendment, or do you have we want a discussion being done, you have questions about it, a lot of people say, don't touch my guns, I don't own one, never will. It's anybody's prerogative. And the best thing to do is contact your legislators. You have 4 of us sitting up here. If you have an idea for a bill, bring it to us. This is how we create those bills and laws. We can't guarantee that they'll all be passed. They may not even make it above the line, but it might be at least considered in a committee. And so that would be my suggestion. Let us know what your thoughts are. And if whoever wrote that question, what was the idea behind it? Let's see what we can do with it. I think that's the best way to do. We're your representatives, and that's why you put us there.
I wrote the question, and my concern is that we have a minority of the population that are concerned about the Second Amendment rights, and we have a majority of the population that's paying the price for that. Rights have responsibilities. I don't see gun owners, gun manufacturers paying their share of the price. I see the people that don't have guns paying the price in lost lives, lost productivity, etc. The losses, according to the law, the Giffords Law Center, comes to a superficial calculation on my part, about $1,900 per non-gun owner Kansas.
Thank you.
And I got lots of ideas, and you will be hearing from me.
Okay.
Perfect.
My card's back there.
Well, appreciate the question. Fully support the Second Amendment, fully support anyone's right to defend themselves and to have access to whatever they see fit to do that. That's not an automatic weapon. I did author the 18 to 20-year-old concealed carry license. I think that offers an opportunity for training, especially for those who are taking advantage of constitutional carry in the state of Kansas at the age of 21. If you want to conceal carry from 18 to 20, you would need to go through the training process and get a license, which is now available to 21-year-olds, but is really only accessed for purposes of reciprocity. And then speaking of the reciprocity bill, it did pass the House. It did have that provision tacked onto it, though my bill didn't pass. It was amended on to the reciprocity bill, which is now in the Senate for Senator Hardy to deal with. But that's my answer.
Okay. Is there a way in future legislative sessions to avoid putting off most legislative action until the last few hours of the regular session? Just nod.
No, I don't think there is. I think people have to be put up against a wall on certain issues and given limited options. You're talking about 125 people in the House and trying to get 63 people to agree on something, and that's difficult to do. So when it's early in the session, there are all sorts of options available for people to grab onto. Late in the session at the 11th hour, there's one option sitting in front of you. So I think typically the most controversial of things do happen at the end just by the nature of the limited options available to folks. But that doesn't mean that those options weren't vetted. Like I said, it's a process, and initially there are many options and they get whittled down to a single option, and that tends to be what came closest to getting that 63 votes. And I assume it's pretty similar on the Senate side with trying to get the 21. But that's just typically the nature of how we do business in the legislature, because we have a deadline. The folks on the federal level don't necessarily have that because they can just keep meeting or continuing resolute their way out of situations, but we don't have that option. We do have to pass a budget every year. That's our constitutional requirement, and that budget must balance. And that's what we'll go back in May and do. We'll get consensus revenue estimates, and once we get those estimates, we have to balance the budget against that estimate. This time it should go fairly quickly. I don't think there's a lot of pushback on what we're doing in the budget right now, but sometimes it's a little more difficult.
I don't really have much to add to that. That's pretty much the way it goes. We'd like to see the bills come up a little bit earlier, but a lot of times it's a committee process. You know, they have to go through the committees, have the pros and cons, and it's not always done right immediately. So, yeah.
I think there are some things that can come up earlier, and I'd like to think there's a way to do that. However, having deadlines, thank goodness we do have them, because who knows how long it would go otherwise. So that part's a good thing, so that those are there. But it would be useful to take some of the discussions on earlier. There are some things that were below the line, which were out of committee and could have been discussed earlier, should we have wanted to take advantage of those. And it's always a challenge. Leadership does have as much as it's fun to criticize them, they do have a huge challenge to figure out how to keep everybody happy and what discussions happen, which ones don't happen, not only among us as stakeholders, but who knows how many others are bending their ear on a lot of things each day. But I think some things could come up earlier, and that would be a more robust way to address some of the issues that we have.
You don't have to comment.
I was just going to say, in defense of legislators, I filed my taxes on April 15th. I pay my bills the last minute I can. And so, I think it's a little bit, it's an extension of the way we work in life too.
All right, so how's it going with Governor Kelly?
Well, Governor Kelly was a senator, and so when I see Governor Kelly, there's really no need to have a get to know you kind of a relationship. We're already, pretty good friends actually, and to me, it's I feel like it's a great experience. Last year when we were debating education, I got a telephone call in my office, and it was Governor Collier. And I said, whoa, this is interesting. I know no governor's ever called me before. And we had a little chat about education. He was wanting to know what I thought. And I said, well, that's great. I appreciate you calling. And this year, I've been in Governor Kelly's office at least 4 times, twice by myself. One day I was working over lunch and in my office, and I was out in the office assistant's portion, and the phone rang. I picked it up, and she walks in with her KBI guy, and I'd like to set up an appointment with Senator Hardy, and can I call you back? She sat in my office and chatted for about 20 minutes. And you know, more or less getting up the pulse of the Senate. I feel honored that I have a good relationship with the governor, although that doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything, but I enjoy the wide-ranging discussion that we have on the Senate side. Well, the same thing happens on the House side too. It's my voice is just one of 40, but it's that broad, wide-ranging discussion where you come to the best solutions for the state of Kansas, and Governor Kelly likes to be included in that conversation.
So the short answer is I think it's going fine. I think it's going good with Governor Kelly. The voters elect who they wish to represent across the board, and I probably worked with Governor Kelly more when she was in the Senate than I have as governor, so I haven't seen her as much, but I work pretty closely with her legislative liaison in talking with policy. I work pretty closely with her budget director, who was one of our colleagues before in the House, and the chair of the K-12 budget committee when he left the House side. So I knew Larry pretty well, and when those issues come up, those are the people that I contact within her office. Very comfortable catch her occasionally, but she's got plenty of other things to deal with. And it does change the approach on some bills in that you look at something, and in one case you'd say, well, okay, this is on its way to become law, or this is on its way to get vetoed. And that dynamic is different than it would have been in the past based on who is on the second floor, who is in the governor's office. So that part of the process is different, but working to try and find a solution that we all agree on is largely the same. And her staff has been open to feedback in terms of what we think is good policy that we most need. So I found that part to be working fine.
I found her to be very approachable. If you have a question, and she was just standing out visiting with some folks, and she said hello, and I visited with her on a brief moment. She's invited groups of us to come to the mansion and just discuss things, what some of policies and what bills are coming up, if they, just getting a feel for the land, so to speak. I was disappointed that we were not able to make it when she was here in Salina, but all of us were at the midnight hour working on bill on the floor, and it was quite late, and I didn't think anybody would still be here after midnight, so we didn't make it. I would have really enjoyed that. I think it would have been an opportunity, to see how she mingles and visits with constituents in each of our areas.
I too dealt with Governor Kelly more frequently as a senator, certainly serving on a joint committee with her, the Joint Committee on State Building Construction. But I think anytime you have a plurality governor, things are a little bit easier to deal with, because she recognizes how difficult re-election is going to be, and that some constituencies who weren't there for her in the election this last time around, she does need in the next round, where there likely won't be a third-party candidate. So I think you see things and evidence of that through like the allowing the Kansas Farm Bureau bill to become law without her signature. She didn't veto it, didn't want to go through the override process, but then didn't sign it either, so that she wasn't upsetting either of those constituencies too terribly much. So I think you'll see some of those things happen when it's pretty evident that a veto override could happen, and eventually be a team building exercise in the House or Senate. But I think overall, as far as just working with her on different topics, some of those are just an extension of what we worked on when she was a senator, particularly some of the things dealing with state buildings, corrections, the docking building, I think, is a big issue in which we agree. And we'll see some action on those items because she is governor now. And certainly have worked with her on those things. So I think we work with each other where it's possible, and we're certainly at odds on a number of issues otherwise.
Thank you. The Farm Bureau insurance type bill, and I'm assuming that's the Farm Bureau health insurance option that they came up with, bill has passed. What concerns now exist, and what are the plans to account for the concerns?
I'm not certain what specific concerns might exist. As I just mentioned, the governor didn't sign it, nor did she veto it, so there's not really a solid stand there on anything that she'd like to see changed there. But I think the bill's a good bill. I think it should have been extended to more organizations. However, it's interesting how one specific organization was the group that wanted to do this and pushed it through instead of just having criteria for types of organizations, which is what we typically do and what the association health plan legislation does. The Farm Bureau one's just a little bit different because of the type of organization they are, but I would have liked to have seen it be more broad in its application to different organizations that are capable of offering those plans.
I think that's probably the crust of it. The one concern that I did have with that is that it's a benefit, considered a benefit, the portion that was in the insurance bill, but yet it doesn't have any scrutiny to the director of insurance. The risk factor that goes to the attorney general if there is an issue, but yet it doesn't have oversight by the insurance department. So, but it is a benefit. Picking up for what Representative Claeys has to say, there were some other things that probably would have made it a little bit better, maybe more spread out, more evenly among other organizations. But that was one of the major concerns I had. I did vote for it, but I was a little concerned. But any time that we can have some type of an insurance benefit for the people that the insurance company serves, that's going to be able to save them in cost is important. But the oversight was the one thing that I was a little hesitant on.
You don't have to. You don't have to. We can move on because we're running out of time and I still have a pile. The legislature is working on a program to get student loans paid off for pilots and engineers. What about designing a program that pays off student loans for other needed careers like social workers, teachers, and corrections workers?
Well, there's a huge difference between the public sector and the private sector, first of all, but we want to encourage companies to grow and build here private sector jobs, so that's one of the reasons that we did that, but it's not exclusive. It doesn't mean that you can't do other things. We did have some discussion about doing a program that would repay those loans, and we found out what the dollar amount was on it. And with the need right now in corrections, in our judicial branch, let me get my list. I think KDOT's even asking now for pay raises. It seemed much more logical to address pay raise issues first before addressing any sort of student loan repayment, because it would only be specific to a very small group of government employees. And we thought that the employees who are there now, that the retention issue was more important to address. So we do have increases in pay across the board, and then also in the judiciary, in corrections, We also added additional funds beyond the normal pay increases that would have happened under the budget bill. So there are pay increases there to start addressing those issues, but we did not see a program like that as being hugely beneficial at this time when we had so many problems with just getting positions filled and retention. You know, it costs a lot of money to have turnover, and the turnover in corrections is costing us a fortune. To go to Senator Hardy's point on taking dollars out of there and putting them to pre-K, I think that's a noble cause, pre-K, and it's important, and we should definitely look at that. But as far as taking those dollars out of corrections, I don't think that's necessary. The corrections department, I don't think, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The Sinaloa and the Crips aren't exactly going to pre-K here in Salina. They're coming from somewhere else and ending up in our prisons. Those folks, they're going to be there one way or the other. So that's just one reason why I think we should invest in those, build the new jail facilities as we need to deal with the addition in beds that needs to happen. But then separately, I think, again, very important to look at pre-K and what benefit that can have for us in the state of Kansas.
So in working through the whole set of issues that are there, I wasn't good at supporting our community on this because I didn't vote for the bill. And it's hard for me to add either spending or the tax change that goes with it. However, if I were looking at it, I think what would make this one different is the possibility of investing through some commerce program to try and grow and create jobs that grows the whole pie. And that's the net game that's usually different as we work on those types of programs than others. So, and how far you could expand any of them then becomes a challenge. While each of those, and I remember at one point on a different topic we talked about, well, what if we invested that in nurses instead, something that we also need in communities? A valid point, great thing to be able to add. Cost is the same. I don't have the potential growth multiplier that brings it back, which I might have. Arguing those numbers isn't always a finite science, but that would be one of the differences between it. Again, I don't happen to support going that route either, and just funding each thing that we need is the bottom line. The other thing that might be similar, just to tie it to the previous question and add a couple comments, I think it is useful if you go that route to try some things and see how they work. So, and does this work? And again, I don't know that it gets through the Senate at this point, but does it work? How do we measure that and say, oh, wow, that really works. Where else might we apply it? Or no, I can't prove the growth and we need to try something else and direct those dollars to pre-K rather than, or whatever it is that we decide is the biggest priority. With the Farm Bureau bill, how can we do healthcare different? How can we address it for people who are in a legitimate group that doesn't have group coverage? It'd be great if we could figure that out. Does this work? We've got a few states that we can look at that they're claiming are working, but let's see if that one works before we maybe expand it to a lot of other areas and see, is there oversight and how do you measure it? So I think it is useful to try some things and see how they work, but the key is to measure it before we go too big with it as well. So thanks for the thoughts and questions on both.
Okay. Do you think Republicans will attempt to approve tax cuts following the veto of SB 22? And would you support these efforts, and what measures are likely to be in the bill? And you might explain what SB 22 is. I think it was a modification of deductions for, okay.
So Senate Bill 22 was originally the effort to neutralize the tax increase from the federal tax changes. So the federal government made a number of tax changes. which inadvertently affected a number of Kansas taxpayers in a way that would increase their taxes. So Senate Bill 22 essentially reversed all of those and said, game over. There's no net change in a Kansas taxpayer's liability based on the federal changes. We did not intentionally create a tax increase. Would we have passed this without? So that was the concept that was behind it. And then adding in the provision for collecting at the internet sales tax location was part of that. And a reduction in food sales tax, ever so small, of 1% was also added, largely in an effort to find folks who would then support that bill. It was, I don't think there was a path for that to succeed, given the governor's position on it, given the likelihood of being able to sustain a veto, frankly, on either side of the legislature. I believe that still is the case. I don't know that it will be taken up on the Senate side after the end of the session. I think the indication is that the veto override will not be taken up. So how do we go forward? Well, that looks at a couple of pieces that are there, what might be in it. These discussions are just starting to happen in more of a flurry, so not there yet. What I would look at this point, you want to look at tax policy and how it affects behavior. That's the key. I don't want to negatively affect behavior if I can. I'd love for it to be fair, but I know in the end, our perceptions of exactly what's fair will always be variant. But looking backwards, that likely takes the repatriation part off of the table. That's now pretty far down the line. It does affect, and that's the foreign companies piece. There's a big part of the foreign company piece that's ongoing. That one, looking back, not as big a deal unless you're one of the 5 companies that it hits, then it's a big deal. But from a total dollar standpoint and ongoing standpoint, not as big a deal. It's about $10 million in aggregate one time, but it's spread about 5 taxpayers. The global intangible low taxed income. This is one that we probably do need to address. And what happened is at the federal level, they threw their hands up in the air and said, we can't understand how this accounting is going on. We have no idea how company A accounts for a product in one place or another, but we think maybe some part of it might have been value added in the U.S. So we are just going to make an assumption that some amount of your total return over the value of your assets in that company is taxable U.S. income. And the U.S. Congress is charged with determining what is taxable income in the U.S. So I would argue that may be above my pay grade. But they determined that these global intangible dollars were taxable. Interestingly enough, the largest group of states, 21, don't tax any foreign dividends or foreign income. So it's not an issue there. They don't tax it anyway. Several tax it at a rate less than we do in Kansas. In Kansas, we have historically taxed foreign dividends, therefore it is included in income in Kansas. However, if we include it fully, as it is in federal income, although fully is 50%, we can get into that detail, we would be in a group of less than half a dozen states that taxes it at the highest level. The next challenge is, if we are in that group and knowing how clear we are on the accounting methods, will the amount apportioned to the state of Kansas stay the same? It is very possible that that could change. So to pick up 20 million of global intangible low taxed income, could I lose apportionment in the percent of income that I'm picking up that is some portion or even greater than that? Well, we'll probably never know. So what I think will happen on that is say, rather than tax it fully at the 50% level, let's tax it consistently as we have taxed it in Kansas as a foreign dividend, which taxes it at the 20% level. So if you asked me to do something with it, that's what I would do at this moment in time. I think that would be consistent, give us a chance to measure what it is, be consistent with how we've handled that in the past, see how other states go. Do other states actually start taxing it now? Well, that'll give us a direction which way to go. Do the few states that do tax it move to tax it less? That'll tell us. I think that would be a good position to be in largely. The other elements that are there, there's the largest one is actually, do you itemize for individuals? Should individuals have the chance to continue to itemize in Kansas if their itemized deductions are less than $24,000 married filing joint or $12,000 single? I'd welcome your feedback on that. It's about $60 million a year. That's a big deal from a revenue standpoint. But a number of people were pretty surprised that they paid more maybe in Kansas tax than they did on federal because they weren't able to itemize when they came up this year. And how do we best address that going forward? Not easy or simple, but that's the one that'll have the biggest fiscal impact. There are several others. There's an expensing provision that will matter. Not sure where that will come out, and the others are relatively small. But I'd say that guilty one is the one that we need to figure out from a policy standpoint. And itemization, we need to just figure out whether we think people should be able to itemize in Kansas.
We are out of time.
Oh.
That's okay. That's okay. I would ask that each of you go ahead and make a closing remark, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you once again for attending. This is what government is meant to be, what it's all about. And when voters are educated, when they're engaged, that's the place where I think we can get the most done. So stay in touch. I appreciate your opinions, and I listen to everyone. So thanks for coming, and you'll be reading a lot about us after May 1.
So thanks, enjoy the rest of today. Thanks for the comments that you had, and please continue to follow up on Second Amendment rights, ideas, proposals on school funding, where we need to be. I may really need your feedback on that tax piece and what to do with itemized deductions. If that's back in play, we need to make some decisions on that. So please catch me afterwards and continue to contact us here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. It's always great to see the audience out here and have such really thoughtful questions. Thanks for everyone who was responsible for having this today. Again, I have a paper in the back. If you do not receive my newsletter, please, if you'd like to, please sign up. There's also some copies of the survey that I had the last time. If you'd like to take one of those along, and maybe if you have some ideas of some of the questions on Medicaid expansion and some of the other issues, because we can't cover everything here today. And just thank you so much for being here. It really is important. And my phone line is always open. It's on my business card as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to call us. This is what we're there for, to answer your questions and see how we could be of service.
Again, thank you to AT&T, the Chamber, and Joyce Volk, our moderator, and for everyone coming out and sharing your Holy Saturday with us. Look forward to going back to the veto session. I think we should probably start calling it the budget session from now on. Though, hey, maybe we will get some vetoes, who knows. But yeah, I think we'll certainly get things wrapped up quickly this time around, hopefully, fingers crossed. And appreciate being here. Thanks.
So this is our final legislative update for this session. So any more questions, concerns, like they said, please take their contact information off the table in the back. And again, thank you all for being here, and thank you to AT&T and Chamber staff for putting it all together. Okay, let's go have a great Easter weekend.